What's up YouTube, it's GhostRider15 here, back at it again with another GOAT format video. And today's video is going to be a trap card tier list of the most commonly played trap cards in the format. So without further ado, let's just jump right into it. Starting off with Gravity Bind. So Gravity Bind is a card that's most commonly played in Panda Burn. The card just floodgates the opponent, it doesn't let them attack. Most monsters are level 4 or higher, so it's going to be very difficult to get in some damage. And it just lets the burn player stall you out so they can eventually draw their cards to kill you. I think this card is, I'd say like B tier because although it is a floodgate, there are still a lot of outs to it. And just because you resolve this card doesn't mean you're just going to automatically win the game. There's cards like Raigeki Break, there's cards like MST, Breaker, Heavy. So there's a lot of good outs to this card. It's still very strong, but not amazingly broken. Next up is going to be another burn card, Ojama Trio. So Ojama Trio, I think, is a very, very strong card in GOAT format. The reason being that you can just floodgate your opponent. You can just stop them from summoning anything. Um, and this card makes it so that once you already have two monsters on the field, you're going to get locked out from summoning monsters because this gives you 3 tokens. So you have to be very careful with playing around this card and making sure that it's not going to lock you out from summoning your monsters. I think this card is very, very good in the burn deck. I think it's A tier. Next up is Ring of Destruction. This card is one of the best trap cards in the format, if not maybe the best. This card steals games. Sometimes you might be down in a lot of card advantage. You can be down like by 6 cards or something, and it won't even matter because your life points are just higher than your opponent and they're really low. So you top deck the ring and you steal the game. And this card's also really good because you can chain it in just about any part of the game, any sub step of the game, as long as it's not damage step. So it's very versatile. This card's a S tier trap card. Next we have Secret Barrel, another burn card. So Secret Barrel, I think, is a card that steals a lot of games. It does so much damage, but at the same time, it is a neg 1, so you have to play this in specifically Panda Burn or Cap Burn, because if you're playing this in any other deck, it's really bad because it's a neg 1. It's very hard to do a lot of damage with it because this card requires cards like Cyber Jar or Morphine Jar to resolve, so you can do a lot of damage with it. It's still decent, but it's not amazing, so it's B tier. Next up on the list is Bottomless Trap Hole. This card is not too commonly played, but it's starting to see a increase in popularity. It's pretty good against the warrior matchup. It does banish their monsters. It stops Breaker from popping a card. But other than that, there's not really any other matchup where it's amazing. If you play it against Turbo, you can't hit any of the flips. And if you hit a Chaos Sorcerer or BLS, they still get priority. Against a control deck, you can't hit Thousand Eyes, which is their best card. You can't hit Tsukiyomi, so it doesn't do anything in that matchup. Against Panda Burn, most of their monsters are very small. The only time their monsters get really big is if they have a panda and you have a lot of monsters on the field. But usually by that time, they're just going to go Heavy Storm or Giant Trunade and kill you. So you won't even get a chance to resolve the Bottomless. Also, another thing that makes Bottomless worse is that compared to something like Sakuretsu Armor, if the monster's already on the field and you top deck the Bottomless, it doesn't do anything. It doesn't get rid of the problem. So I think this one goes into the C tier category. Next up is Jar Greed. Jar Greed is a card that is mostly played in Chaos Turbo. There's a couple other strategies that use it as well, but Chaos Turbo tends to be the one that sees the most play. Um, so I think it's great. I'm one of the few players that likes to play it at three. Every now and then I'll play it at two or one, but usually three because I just like being able to speed up through my deck so fast. I like that it's a chainable card, so sometimes players get greedy, summon something like Breaker, and then you can just chain the Jar of Greed, and it just helps you see your power cards a lot faster. So I think this card is an A tier trap card. Next up is Raigeki Break. Raigeki Break is mostly played in Turbo. A couple of other decks play it, such as the Relinquish deck and sometimes Chaos Control, but mostly it's just Relinquish and Turbo, just because they have better discards for it. And I think this card is one of the best trap cards in the format, just because it's so versatile. You can chain it at any time. Also, it's very good because it destroys the card. It gets rid of the problem. If you're trying to get rid of something, Regeki Break is probably the best answer there is because you can hit like a set monster, you can hit a spell or trap. It doesn't matter. It's still gonna get rid of the problem. This card's amazing. S tier for sure. Next up is Widespread Ruin. This card is commonly played in the side deck, not too often in the main, but it's used against warriors or earth aggro usually. And it's a decent card, but the problem is that it has to destroy the highest attacking monster. So there's going to be situations when the opponent has like a Mystic Swordsman level 2 or a Donzalug, and along with another monster that's bigger, such as Kaiku. And now you don't have the option of hitting the Mystic Swordsman or the Donzalug because they're smaller than the Kaiku. And that might be the actual threat during that specific moment. So, yeah, it's not as good as Sakuretsu Armor. And the effect that, or the part of the text that says that it doesn't target, I think doesn't matter too much. The only time it really matters is if you're playing against like some sort of like reasoning gate or Horus deck where they go King Dragoon on you. But besides that, it doesn't matter. So I think this card is like B tier. All right, so next we have Nightmare Wheel. This is another burn card. There's so many burn cards on this list. So this one I don't think is that good. I think it's overrated. Sure, it does 500 damage every turn, but usually it's not going to stick around for too long because against Chaos Turbo or Chaos Control or even the Relinquish deck, they usually just go Thunder Dragon, tribute whatever's being hit by Nightmare Wheel, and now the Nightmare Wheel is just not doing anything anymore. So yeah, I don't think the card is really that good. Um, I think it's C tier. All right, so next we have Call the Haunted. This card is played a lot in Warrior as well as Reasoning Gate. Um, this card can bring back a lot of good cards such as Chaos Sorcerers, BLS, Kaiku, or even Demok, which are all very good targets. And in this format, there's not that many special summons per turn. And this is one of the few ways to actually get a special summon besides like Chaos Sorcerer or BLS. So I really like it. It's not that good in Turbo because you really don't have that many great targets besides your Chaos monsters. Also, I like the fact that you can use it during the battle phase. So sometimes you can bait out like a mirror force or a ring, and then you can just activate the Call of the Haunted. So I do like that. Also, I like the fact that you can use it on your opponent's turn as well. That usually only matters when you have a Kaiku in your graveyard and you expect your opponent to have a BLS or Sorcerer in their hand. But yeah, I do think it's a very strong trap card. It's A tier. Next up is Mirror Force. Mirror Force is the best battle trap in the format for the fact that you can destroy every single monster that's attacking. Also, it doesn't target. That's another boost that it gets. And just the fact that the opponent always has to respect it. Like, if you don't have Mirror Force in your graveyard, your opponent's always going to be looking out for it. And sometimes, if they get too aggressive and they don't respect it, they just get punished, they get blown out. It's really good against aggro decks such as Warriors and Earth Aggro. So I definitely have this one as the top of A tier. Next up is Compulsory Evacuation Device. This card sees occasional play, usually in the side deck. Not too often, but I felt like it was still worth putting here on this list. Um, it's usually sided for control decks such as Thousand Eyes Restrict because that's a very difficult card to deal with sometimes, especially for the warrior strategy or the earth aggro strategy. And Compulse can really come in clutch in that matchup. But with that being said, it's not good in any other matchup besides the control matchup. Against Turbo, it's really bad because hitting a sorcerer really doesn't do much. They still get priority. In the burn matchup, you're not really solving any problem. Uh, in the Reasoning Gate matchup, it doesn't really do too much as well. Usually, bouncing a monster just kind of helps him out sometimes. So yeah, I don't think it's that good. It's a neg one. I think it's C tier. Next up on the list is Dust Tornado. This card is a really nice card because it does help in a lot of different matchups. It's very versatile. I like the fact that you can side it in against Decree decks, against Warriors, against Burn, against Earth Aggro. There's so many uses just because it's really generic. And sometimes it helps you play around like Dustshoot or Delinquent Duo because it lets you set a spell or trap after it resolves. The card's very nice, it's very strong. It's not insanely broken because it is limited into what it can destroy. Like it can't hit monsters, so that's why I don't think it's S tier. But I think it's like a good A tier card. All right, so next up we have Phoenix Wind Blast. Um, for a while, I was running Phoenix Wind Blast in my Turbo deck almost all the time, as well as other players in the GOAT format community. And it's just amazing in the mirror match. Like, in the Turbo mirror match, you love to see it because, putting lighter darks in the grave is not ideal in the mirror match. It's also pretty good in the control matchup as well. That way you get Thousand Eyes in the back to the extra deck and keep a dark monster out of their graveyard. Um, it's also very strong in the Reasoning Gate matchup because if that deck bricks and you put a card back to the top of their deck, they're almost guaranteed to lose. So if you're playing against Reasoning, you expect a lot of Reasoning. Wind Blast is the way to go. But with that being said, the card does not get rid of the problem. So there's going to be a lot of situations when you don't want to put a set Magician of Faith or a Snatch Steal or a Breaker or a BLS back to the top, because those aren't cards you want to see on the field again. You want those cards gone, you want them in the graveyard, but Windblast doesn't do that, unfortunately. If you want to do something like that, you go with Raigeki Break. So, yeah, that is the downside to Windblast. I just think Raigeki Break is more versatile in a diverse field. But if you expect like a lot of mirror matches, then Windblast is better, of course. But that's just usually not the case in tournaments. So I think Windblast is A tier. Next up is Sakuretsu Armor. This card is usually main decked in like aggro strategies because they just can't afford the luxury of playing cards like Raigeki Break. And it's also on the side deck for those matchups as well in like turbo side decks. Um, it's really nice because it's probably the cleanest answer to Warriors. They attack, you get rid of the monster. Very simple solution. It's not overly broken. It's not insane. It doesn't go like plus. It's just a one for one trade, but it is a really nice one for one trade. Um, the one downside I will say is that it is a very slow card because it has a very specific activation timing. You can only use it when they attack. So your opponent can play around it by not attacking, and you can't hit any spells or traps with this because it's limited to just monster attacks. So it is very slow and very specific. Um, so I will say it's a B tier card. All right, so next up is Trap Dustshoot. Um, Trap Dustshoot is amazing just for the fact that turn one, there's really no counterplay to this. There's nothing you can do about it. Let's say you're going second and your opponent set Dustshoot turn one. Like, what are you gonna do? You really can't do anything. It once they flip it during standby, it's gonna resolve. It's gonna send back a monster. Your opponent knows your entire hand now, and a really good player is gonna take advantage of that. Just having the knowledge of knowing what every single card is in your opponent's hand is broken. Good players know exactly how to take advantage of those type of situations. So yeah, it is a very very powerful card. Yeah, there is a downside that you might draw it late game, and your opponent doesn't have four cards. But I feel like the pros heavily outweigh the cons. So this card is an S tier trap card. Next up is Solemn Judgment. Solemn Judgment's a card that does see a lot of play in the Warrior main deck. Um, it has fallen out of favor recently in the Turbo main deck, and I understand, I get it. Like, there's a lot of times when you don't want to see it early, just because paying half your life can be very risky in certain matchups. Like in the Turbo Mirror, it's not really that bad, but if you're playing against like Warriors or Earth Aggro or Cat Burn, it's not a card you want to use right away. So I get why it's starting to lose popularity in the Turbo main deck. But with that being said, I still think it's a very strong card in simplified game states. For example, let's say you have a sorcerer with Solemn set and your opponent only has one card. You can just Solemn the threat knowing that you're going to be fine because your opponent doesn't have a plethora of cards in their hand. So, yeah, Solemn really shines in simplified game states. And also, I really like the fact that Solemn is very versatile. It can stop just about anything. It can stop monsters, spells, traps. And also, it prevents priority from being activated, so that's also very strong. So, yeah, it's still very good. It's still a very good card. I say it's an A tier card. Next up is Zing Zing Hu. Um, this is a card that's teched in Warriors as a one of, or sometimes it's side decked. And, I see why Warrior players play this card. It's very strong. It helps lock out two back rows, so it's like a pseudo plus one. Because although you're not actually destroying the card, it's still technically getting rid of the problem as long as the Zing Zing Hu is on the field. So if you're able to lock out two back rows as a warrior player, you can just play aggressive and go crazy, and it just makes it a lot easier for you to resolve your Blade Knights, resolve your Donzalugs, your Kaikus. So I understand why warrior players really like this card. I think it's very strong. I think it's very annoying to deal with. And I think I'm going to put it in the A tier category. Next up is Royal Decree. Royal Decree is a card that's really, really tough to deal with. Very annoying because there's not that many answers to it, especially game one. Like, let's say you're playing against a deck that runs Decree. They go turn one Decree on you. Your only answers are usually going to be Breaker, MST, or Heavy, and that's it. And you really have to save your Breaker, MST, Heavy specifically for this card just to make sure you don't lose to it, especially if you're a trap heavy deck. So it's tough. It's not an easy card to play around. And yeah, just for the fact that it locks out a whole mechanic, a whole game mechanic, just makes it broken. I think the only downside to it is that you can't really play your own trap cards in your deck if you're going to be playing this card because it's going to contradict if you're playing a lot of traps along with Decree. But yeah, I still think it's a very powerful card. It's an A tier card. Next up we have Torrential Tribute. Torrential Tribute is a card that is kind of falling out of favor in the main deck for Chaos Turbo players. And I'm not sure if I agree on that. I'm not sure if I agree on the card not being in the main anymore. Like, I get it. There's times when you have a flip monster set, and if you're playing against warriors, if they just go summon Blade Knight, you're just gonna go neg one anyway, even if you flip the Torrential Tribute, unless you have a Sanguine or Sinister set, which I think still makes it worth playing the Torrential because there's gonna be times when you have the Sanguine Sinister, and your opponent overextends and you just end up blowing them out that way. And it's also really good against control decks because it just cleanly outs the board of scapegoat tokens. So I still think it's a very strong card. If you're not maining it, I think you should at least side it. So I think it's like an A tier card. Next up is Magic Drain. Magic Drain is a card that is sometimes teched in like warrior decks or stuff like that. Not too often, but I do see it occasionally. And I'm not that big of a fan on it. Because sure, you make your opponent discard another spell card, but let's say your opponent activates Trinity first and you chain Magic Drain. So if they discard any spell card, now the Pot of Greed is still gonna be a +1. The Duo is still gonna be a +1. The Graceful still has potential to be a +1. So it's not really stopping the problem. The only time it actually stops the problem if it's the only spell card in the opponent's hand. That's it. So it's not a terrible card, but it's not like really good or anything like that. It's not worth running, I think. I think it's a C tier card. Alright, next is Ojama Trio. Or not Ojama Trio. Just Desserts. Just Desserts, this card is usually only played in Burn. If you're playing it in anything else, you might be a little crazy. Um, yeah, by itself, it's an egg one, so that makes it bad. Um, Also, it does 500 for each monster on the field, so it has to combo well with cards such as Ojama Trio. Because like without Ojama Trio, you can easily play around this card. But it is easier said than done because the opponent usually will draw into an Ojama Trio eventually. But if you play aggressive enough, you can make it till the card doesn't be good. So, um, I just think the card isn't that good. You still play it in Burn, of course, but it's not like broken or anything like that. I'll say it's like B tier. So, the last card on the list is Magic Cylinder. So, Magic Cylinder is an interesting card. Uh, I know one of my buddies, LeBounty, plays it sometimes, occasionally. I don't think he plays it too often anymore, but I've seen him cook with it, and it can be decent in the Warrior Mirror match because, you know, a lot of Solemns happen, a lot of battle damage happens, and all the monsters in that matchup are going to be huge. So if a cylinder resolves, the opponent's usually going to take a lot of damage. So I can see it being played in the aggro mirror match. But other than that, this card doesn't really do much. Um, yeah. I think I'm going to put it in C tier. Alright. So that's pretty much it. That is the tier list that I have for the most commonly played trap cards in GOAT format. Feel free to disagree with my list. Let me know in the comment section down below what you would change, if anything. Yeah, that's pretty much it. If you like this type of content, please like and subscribe. This is Ghostwriter 15 signing out.